Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been in Sea Cadets for about 2 years now, which means I've learned some basic self-defense and how to stay calm under pressure. My parents both work demanding jobs. My mom's a nurse and my dad works construction, so they're usually pretty busy during school hours. I'm used to handling things on my own most of the time, which honestly prepared me for what was about to happen. So there I was in my 7th grade Texas history class on what started as a perfectly normal Tuesday. Our teacher had just given us this assignment where we had to work in groups and pick 3 innovations that were made in Texas and affected the economy. Pretty standard stuff, right? My group was just me and a couple of other kids, and we were brainstorming ideas when someone suggested Barney the purple dinosaur. You know, that singing and dancing character from TV. We figured since he was created in Dallas, he counted as a Texas innovation that definitely affected the economy. Kids all over the world knew Barney, so it seemed like a solid choice. Part of our assignment was to draw pictures of our chosen innovations, so I got on one of the school computers to find some reference images. I typed Barney into Google and started scrolling through the results. Most of it was the usual stuff: promotional photos, screenshots from the show, merchandise. But then I stumbled across something weird. It was a mugshot style photo of someone in a Barney costume with text that said drunk and disorderly. I laughed at how ridiculous it looked, so I called my friend over to check it out. We were both cracking up when this kid from another table came over to see what was so funny. This kid has autism and he sometimes misunderstands things or gets confused about what's real versus what's fake. When he saw the fake mugshot, his eyes got really wide and he asked me if Barney had killed someone. I was caught off guard and didn't know how to explain that it was just a joke image. I tried to tell him no and that it wasn't real, but before I could finish explaining, he ran over to our teacher and yelled that Barney had killed someone. Our teacher looked alarmed and walked over to where the kid was pointing. The teacher asked who had told him that, and the kid said that somebody had told him. The teacher then looked directly at me and walked over. I had already closed the browser and was trying to look up information about 3D printers for our project. The teacher told me to show him my search history, and I explained that I was on private browsing, so there wasn't any history. He told me to press the back arrow instead. I reluctantly clicked back, which brought up my previous search with Barney the Killer still in the search bar. The teacher asked why I had been Googling that, so I explained the whole situation. I told him that after we found out Barney was made in Dallas, we decided to use him as our first innovation. While looking up photos for my group member to trace, I came across this fake mugshot photo. That's when the other kids saw it and got confused. I said I was just curious about where the image came from. The teacher said there wasn't really any proof of wrongdoing and asked for my phone. I handed it over and he looked through it for a few minutes before giving it back. He told me not to look up any more inappropriate things, and I agreed. But that wasn't the end of it. The next period, I got called to the principal's office. When I walked in, I saw not just the principal, but also this woman I recognized as the kid's mom, a man who must have been the dad, and the kid himself sitting in chairs. My parents weren't there because they were both at work and couldn't just drop everything. The principal greeted me and told me to have a seat, but before I could even respond, the mom cut him off and asked if I had anything to say. I tried to explain that if this was about the Barney thing, I could tell them what happened. The mom snapped at me not to play dumb with her. The principal looked flustered and tried to regain control by asking the woman to be quiet so I could explain my side regarding the bullying reports. Wait, bullying reports? I was completely confused. I told them I had never bullied anyone, but the mom insisted that I had. I asked if she even had proof, which probably wasn't the smartest thing to say to an adult. But I was getting frustrated. The mom said I knew exactly what she meant, but I told her I really didn't understand what she was talking about. That's when Karen completely lost it. She started screaming and reached into her purse. To my horror, she pulled out pepper spray and one of those metal self-defense rods. She actually started advancing toward me, spraying the pepper spray and swinging the stick. I knew I had to act fast. Thanks to my Sea Cadet training, I knew how to handle dangerous situations. First, I grabbed her wrist that was holding the metal rod to stop her from hitting me. When she tried to pull away, I twisted her wrist until she dropped the weapon. While she was distracted, I managed to grab the pepper spray from her other hand and sprayed it back at her. The principal had already hit the emergency button, and within minutes, the school police officers rushed in. The dad was trying to hold Karen back, and the kid was just sitting there looking confused and scared. Karen was arrested on the spot. The officers took statements from everyone, and I had to explain the whole situation from the beginning. Apparently, Karen had convinced herself that I was somehow bullying her son by showing him that fake Barney image, even though it was completely accidental, and I had tried to explain it wasn't real. A week later, we had a court date. Karen was charged with assault on a minor, bringing weapons onto school property, and creating a public disturbance. The judge wasn't having any of her excuses about protecting her child. The security footage from the principal's office clearly showed her attacking me first. She ended up with community service, anger management classes, and a restraining order that kept her away from the school. I also found out that this wasn't her first incident. She had apparently caused problems at her son's previous school too. The crazy part is that the kid and I actually became friends after all this. Once his dad explained what had really happened, the kid understood that I wasn't trying to hurt or scare him. His dad even apologized for his wife's behavior and thanked me for not fighting back harder than I had to. When it comes to our Texas history project, we ended up getting an A. We kept Barney as one of our innovations, but this time we stuck to official photos from the show. Last summer, my brother went through a messy divorce, and dealing with his ex-wife's family was always a nightmare. His ex-mother-in-law was the worst, always causing drama at family gatherings and acting like the world revolved around her. Even after the divorce, she still showed up to community events like she owned the place. Our small village decided to host a summer fair to raise money for the volunteer firefighters. They desperately needed new equipment, and everyone pitched in to help. The whole thing was pretty wholesome. Local vendors, games for kids, and a little beauty pageant for the children that was supposed to be fun and innocent. The pageant had simple rules. 2 age groups, 2 to 4 years old and 5 to 6 years old. All the kids had to do was walk down a makeshift runway in their cute dresses. No talents, no complicated routines, just adorable little girls being adorable. They set up this massive tent that could hold about 1,000 people, but only about 300 showed up, mostly proud parents and grandparents who couldn't find an excuse to leave. I was there supporting the fundraiser when I spotted my brother's ex-mother-in-law in the crowd. She had her 3-year-old granddaughter with her, all dressed up in a beautiful white dress with her hair done up and a little makeup. The kid looked precious, and honestly, I thought it was sweet that she wanted to participate. The older kids went first and everything was going smoothly. Then came time for the little ones. The 3-year-old granddaughter stepped onto the stage, looking like a tiny princess. All she had to do was walk from one end to the other and back. Simple enough, right? Well, the organizers had placed these gorgeous flower arrangements in the middle of the runway as decoration. This little girl, being 3 years old and completely innocent, couldn't resist stopping right in the middle to smell the flowers. She was totally oblivious to the crowd, just enjoying the pretty blooms like any normal kid would. The audience was eating it up, everyone was going, "Aww," and taking pictures. It was genuinely the cutest thing you'd ever see. The kid was just being a kid, and it was perfect. That's when Karen, and yes, that's what I'm calling my brother's ex-mother-in-law because she earned it, completely lost her mind. She suddenly stood up and started yelling about how the little girl was trying to steal the show and how unfair it was. Before anyone could react, she jumped up from her seat and stormed onto the stage. The whole tent went silent when she walked over to this innocent 3-year-old and grabbed her arm. Karen kept shouting that the child couldn't just stop in the middle and that this wasn't her moment. She started dragging the poor kid off the stage. The little girl immediately burst into tears and started screaming for her mom. It was heartbreaking to watch, but Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had awakened the mama bear. the little girl's mother shot out of her seat like a rocket and charged onto the stage. I'd never seen someone move so fast. The mom yelled at Karen to let her daughter go right now. She grabbed Karen by the hair, spun her around, and got right in her face. For a split second, Karen was so shocked that she loosened her grip on the child. And that was all the opening the mom needed. Wham! The mom delivered the most perfect right hook I'd ever seen. I'm talking Muhammad Ali level precision. Karen's nose exploded in a spray of blood, and I swear I heard something crack in her jaw. She went down like a sack of potatoes, shrieking like a banshee. Karen screamed that the other woman was crazy and had broken her nose. She tried to get up and swing back, but by then the volunteer firefighters had rushed onto the stage and pulled them apart. The whole pageant had turned into complete chaos. Kids were crying, parents were shouting, and Karen was bleeding all over her fancy outfit. But instead of being embarrassed and leaving quietly, Karen decided to double down on the crazy. She started demanding that the mom be arrested, claiming she had been assaulted and that the whole thing was outrageous. The firefighters separated them to opposite sides of the tent while someone called the police. Karen spent the entire wait ranting about how she was going to sue everyone and how the other mom was a dangerous criminal. Meanwhile, the actual victim, that poor 3-year-old, was being comforted by her mother, who was clearly still ready to throw down if needed. When the cops showed up, they started interviewing witnesses to figure out what happened. Pretty much everyone told the same story. Karen had grabbed a random child and dragged her off stage, and the mom had defended her daughter. The officer walked over to Karen, who was still holding tissues to her bloody nose. He told her that he understood she wanted to press charges, but he needed to warn her about something first. Karen insisted that, yes, she absolutely wanted to press charges because that woman was dangerous. The officer tried to explain that, if she insisted on pursuing this, they would have to prosecute everyone involved to the full extent of the law, and that would include her for what she did to the child. But Karen kept interrupting him before he could explain properly. Every time he tried to warn her, she cut him off with more demands for justice. Finally, the officer just gave up trying to reason with her. The cop told her okay, she had asked for it, and that's when Karen found out that grabbing someone else's kid without permission is considered kidnapping a minor. The realization hit her like a truck. Karen started backtracking, claiming that wasn't what happened, and she was just trying to help. The officer explained that she had multiple opportunities to de-escalate the situation, but she kept demanding they arrest the mother for defending her child against someone who had kidnapped her daughter. Karen couldn't accept that she was the villain in this story. When the officer was explaining her rights, she actually tried to lunge at him. That's when his partner stepped in with a taser. The sound Karen made when she got tased will haunt my dreams forever. She went down twitching and screaming, and they had to call an ambulance to make sure she was okay before they could book her. 6 months later, Karen stood before a judge who was clearly not impressed with her story. She got 2 years of probation and had to complete 1,000 hours of community service. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she'd have to spend all that time actually helping people instead of terrorizing them. The mom who threw the punch, our entire neighborhood pulled together and bought her the most beautiful cake you'd ever seen. Everyone had hated Karen for years after various incidents around town, and seeing her get what was coming to her felt like justice. All charges against the mom were dropped because she was defending her daughter from what the court recognized as a legitimate kidnapping threat. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that the punch wasn't necessary since Karen had already let go of the child, but the mom's lawyer shut that down fast. The defense attorney told the judge that his client had no way of knowing whether the danger had truly passed or if Karen had simply released the child in order to attack her instead. He argued that the punch was completely justified given the circumstances. The judge agreed completely. Karen walked away with a criminal record, a hefty community service requirement, and the knowledge that everyone in town thought she got exactly what she deserved. That little 3-year-old girl who started this whole mess by stopping to smell the flowers. She won the pageant. Turns out the judges thought her natural, innocent behavior was exactly what the competition was supposed to celebrate. Karen's granddaughter got a participation ribbon and a hug from the winner because that's how normal people handle children's competitions. This story happened to my dad back in the late 1970s when he was 17. I'm telling it exactly how he told it to me, along with details from my grandfather and other family members who were there. My dad grew up in a rough working class town in the UK. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but people minded their own. It was run down, full of poor families, and had plenty of crime, but there was a strong sense of community. My dad wasn't exactly a model student and spent most of his time playing music or hanging out with friends. He was incredibly talented with instruments and had a busy social life, but aside from one speeding ticket, he'd never been in real trouble with the police. For his 17th birthday, one of his friends gave him this amazing leather motorcycle jacket. It had a very specific logo on it and was rare and expensive. My dad was over the moon about it. This friend had bought himself the exact same jacket a few months earlier, and giving my dad one was a complete surprise. My grandmother made jokes about how, when they wore their jackets together, they looked like twins. She wasn't wrong since they had similar builds, had the same black hair, and both were known around town for their motorcycle gear. A few days after his birthday, my dad was finishing his shift as a bartender in the town center. It was around 10 p.m. when he left work and started walking to where his bike was parked. When he got close to it, 5 men came up behind him. The last thing he remembered was getting hit over the head and hitting the ground. These guys beat my dad with bike chains and a crowbar. They literally almost killed him. If 2 bouncers from a nearby pub hadn't heard the noise and come running, my dad probably wouldn't have survived. The attackers ran off when the bouncers showed up and someone called the police. My dad was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Here's where it gets really messed up. It turned out that the friend who gave him the jacket had a serious gambling problem. He owed a lot of money to some very dangerous people. These loan sharks had been looking for him and had threatened to teach him a lesson. So this coward came up with a plan to save his own skin. He bought my dad that matching jacket because the loan sharks knew he always wore his when riding around town. Then he had someone else watch my dad's work schedule and tip off the thugs about when and where they could find him, except it wasn't him, it was my dad wearing the identical jacket. The snake basically used my dad as a decoy to take the beating he deserved. When my grandparents found out what happened, they were devastated. My grandfather's first concern was whether my dad would survive. Once the doctors said he would make it, his second thought was revenge. My grandfather was not someone you wanted to mess with. He'd been a boxer his whole life and spent his career in the military. He enlisted at 17 near the end of World War II, served in Korea, and then worked as a scout and sniper in Malaysia and Burma during the 1950s. Even in his 50s, he was tough as nails. He might not have been the perfect husband or father, but nobody hurt his family without payback. The first thing my grandfather did was start making phone calls. He contacted every ex-military buddy, bouncer, and pub owner he knew, plus some less legitimate characters from around town. Word traveled fast in our area, and my grandfather was well respected and had quite a reputation. It didn't take long for him to get the names and addresses of all 5 men who had attacked my dad. These idiots had been bragging around town about beating up some defenseless guy. They were career criminals with violent reputations, but my grandfather didn't care who they were or what they'd done before. Next, my grandfather called up some of the most dangerous guys he'd served with in the military. He explained what had happened, and every single one of them was ready to help. They planned everything carefully since they knew that if they went after one of the thugs, the others would hear about it and disappear. So they decided to hit all 5 of them on the same night. One night, the group kicked in the doors of each attacker's home and beat them senseless. All 5 of them got the treatment they'd given my dad. But worse, my grandfather knew that in our neighborhood nobody would call the police since talking to cops was considered the worst thing you could do back then, so there was little chance of getting caught. By the end of the night, all 5 guys were bloodied messes with broken bones and shattered teeth. One of them had to be put in a medically induced coma. When the police eventually interviewed them in the hospital, None of them said a word, partly because they were terrified of my grandfather, and partly because being labeled a snitch would have been even worse for them. But my grandfather wasn't finished. He used his connections in the local clubs and bars to spread rumors about why these 5 men had been beaten up. Soon, word got around that they had screwed up badly, they'd beaten up the wrong person, bragged about it, and lied to their bosses about what really happened. Not only were they physically broken, but my grandfather destroyed their reputation in the criminal world. When they finally got out of the hospital, nobody wanted anything to do with them. After dealing with the attackers, my grandfather turned his attention to the snake. He'd saved him for last on purpose, knowing the guy would be terrified once he realized my grandfather knew what he'd done. But instead of just beating him up, my grandfather had something more creative in mind. He thought a simple beating was too good for someone who had betrayed his son like that. My grandfather did some asking around and found out that the snake wasn't just a compulsive gambler, but had also become a heavy drug addict. My grandfather found out who he was buying from, when he usually made his purchases, and where he was living. He had one of his buddies follow the snake during a drug buy and track him back to his place. Then my grandfather made an anonymous phone call to the police. He told them there was a huge drug deal going down at the snake's address and claimed he thought he heard gunshots. He got 2 of his friends to make similar calls with the same story. The police took it seriously, searched the house, and caught the snake red-handed with massive amounts of drugs, counterfeit money, and other illegal stuff. The snake was arrested, charged with multiple crimes, and denied bail. He ended up pleading guilty to everything and got at least 15 years in prison. To make things worse, he still owed money to dangerous people, and his time in prison was made much more difficult because of that debt. The snake's life was completely destroyed. His parents disowned him, his girlfriend left him, and when he eventually got out, he couldn't find work because of his criminal record. He had to move far away because nobody in town wanted anything to do with him. My dad eventually recovered from his injuries, though you can still see the scars on his body from that night. My grandfather never told anyone what he'd done until my dad asked him about it directly when my grandfather got sick in the early 1990s. Of the 5 men who attacked my dad, 3 ended up in prison later in life, and 2 ended up dead due to their criminal activities. My grandfather passed away in the late 1990s. Even though he and my dad had their problems over the years, nobody could say he didn't protect his family when it mattered most. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.